This is about who slows down the least. The most important thing you have to understand is that
I've got a hot take on this, okay? So this is what most people disagree with me on. Question from the fans: how do we drop time from a 26 to a 24 in the 50 freestyle? What do you think?
well, I think what we just kind of went into with regards to getting stronger in the water, I think is very, very important. And again, I want to kind of talk about the dry land side of things, especially I think when you're looking to drop from 26 to 24, I think these are now some, I mean, if you're talking long course meters or short course meters, even yards are still pretty good. I mean, we are now talking some big boy numbers. So you got to start, I think you definitely need to start looking into doing some swim specific dry land work, which I think is very, very important. If you're looking to, again, build more power, especially off the blocks, off your turns, the underwaters, you have to make sure you're doing and following a good dry land program. So your plyometrics, your jumps, pull-ups, bodyweight exercises, I think I'm a really big fan of, like the calisthenic side of things. I personally like to do, like I say, loads of pull-ups, load of deficit push-ups. I like to get strong in certain positions, I like to call it. Again, a lot of kids and swimmers in general go to the gym and they kind of just pump up the weight and they try to get strong, they try to get big. But again, what I like to say is, if swimming was all about who the strongest person is, then the world's strongest people would also be the best swimmers, which is obviously not the case. So you have to make sure you are getting strong in those positions, which is, again, your overhead mobility, your being able to get into certain positions when you swim and when you go to the gym, I think is very, very important. So my personal piece of advice to you guys out there, if you're looking to drop time in your 53, is follow a good dry land program.
Yeah, and if you want to get specific, when you get under 30 seconds or you're trying to get under 30 seconds in the 50 free, now you're at a point where you can actually start to break apart the 50 into a few different pieces, and you should know your time in each of those pieces. So whether it's, if you take a 50 meter pool or a 25 meter pool or even 25 yard pool, you should know how fast you are at halfway. You should know how fast you are to 15 meters. And so when you think about the 50 freestyle or a 50 of any stroke, it's really a few parts. So you have the start, then you go to 15 meters, and that should have a time that you can measure and you can improve and you can focus on specific things. Then you have from about 15 meters to 25 meters, the next 10 meters. So that right there is two parts, and you should know your time at 15 meters and know your time at 25 meters. Then you have the second half of the race, and this is where people normally fall apart. And so are you falling apart at the very, very end, or are you falling apart between 25 and 35 or 40 meters? And so if you think about those 3 to 4 parts of the race, when you're getting under 30 seconds, you're trying to get under 30 seconds, now you're at a point where you should be isolating which part of the race you're trying to get better at. And every set and every piece of intentionality you put into your training should be focused on one of those areas. And the faster you go, like when we start to get down to 24 or 23 or 22, this is really the only way you get faster, because you have to isolate the start, the breakout, the 15 meters, your top end speed, maintaining it, not falling apart at the end. Because if you don't do that, well, then what's going to happen is you're going to try and work on everything at the same time, and that's not going to get you any faster than what you've already been able to do. You're going to plateau.
Yep. You just reminded me of a quote Bob Bowman would said, which is, it's not about who goes the fastest, it's about who slows down the least, which I think is very, very important, especially for those 50s and not, like you mentioned, maintaining and make sure you're not falling apart on that back end of your race.
Totally.
So Coach Faris, how do you think the stroke mechanics and stroke technique changes from the 50 freestyle to the 200 freestyle? What are the differences?
Yeah, I think this applies for every stroke, but maybe let me cover one of the strokes and you cover freestyle. Sure. So I'll talk about breaststroke, and this can be applied for the other strokes as well, but let's focus on breaststroke. The 50 breaststroke, it's all about power per stroke. You got to have a high tempo. Yep. You can't wait around. But in the 200 breaststroke, your distance per stroke becomes a lot more important. You literally count how many strokes you take in a 200 breaststroke, even a 200 butterfly race. Your pullouts become a lot more important. They're a lot longer. Your breath control becomes more important in a 200 breaststroke. So yes, you're swimming for longer. Your average speed per 50 is going to be slower in a 200 compared to a 50, but the tempo that you have is going to be faster in a 50, and you need to be a lot more patient with your stroke in the 200 as compared to the 50, where you have to be a lot more aggressive. But I think freestyle has some different intricacies, so tell us about that.
Yeah. So I mean, first of all, if you are looking to swim faster, especially on a 50s or the shorter distances of freestyle, the most important thing you have to understand is that if you are simply moving your arms twice as quick and pulling half the amount of water, you're not moving any quicker, right? This is what a lot of people don't understand. They start spinning their arms, their head is down, they're kicking, they're just pulling really fast, their tempo is really high, but they're just missing their whole distance per stroke. You are, like I say, you are moving your arms twice as fast. you're pulling half the amount of water. So how are you actually swimming faster? You are not. So in order to be able to swim fast, you have to make sure you are able to an extent, maintain a good distance per stroke. So you cannot just enter, pull halfway, bring your arm out, and then spin your arms around. So if you are looking to start swimming fast in a 50 freestyle, you want to make sure not only are you working on your tempo, which is also very, very important, you are also keeping in mind that you have to maintain a good distance per stroke. So do not try to increase your tempo. Do not try to increase your tempo unless you are able to maintain your distance per stroke. I've said the same thing like 3 times, sorry.
No, it's fine. And actually, let me add on to that, mechanics specifically. So in like a 50 freestyle, you're not going to breathe.
Yes.
Very much. Maybe you breathe once, twice, 3 times, but really the focus is keeping your head in line and just generating as much power as possible per stroke. When you look at a 200 race, really 100 and up, you breathe every 2 strokes. And I think mechanically, that's one of the biggest differences between a 50 and anything that's longer than 100. If you look at the best swimmers in the world, they're all breathing every 2 strokes. Some will breathe every 3, but there's like a rhythm to the stroke. The 50, the rhythm's all about maximum power per stroke, head down, don't breathe. And so these are 2 of probably the biggest differences, but everything that you mentioned, what I was saying about the breaststroke, still applies, where the tempo is different. If you just move your arms faster, but you're not pulling any more water, you're actually gonna get tired more quickly, in which case your average speed's gonna go down even faster. So you gotta, again, we don't wanna overcomplicate this, but just simplify it to efficient technique. The longer the race, you're able to be even more patient with the stroke, but it starts from a place of like a max distance per stroke, and then the shorter the race, the more power and tempo that you apply.
Totally. I think a really good one as well is I don't actually think breathing is that bad. I know a lot of coaches, 50 freestyle, of course, as you mentioned, our goal is to try and minimize our breathing, but I've come across a lot of coaches and a lot of swimmers where they are the whole no breathing and trying to limit your breathing in races such as 100 and 200 is like you want to limit your breathing, which I personally don't agree with. I think this might be a little bit of a hot take, but if you are able to take a breath in a way that it doesn't affect your stroke, I don't think breathing is a bad thing. As we all know, your body requires oxygen to operate, right? So if you are trying to minimize the amount you're breathing over a 2-minute race, you are simply going to die. Your body is going to shut down. So I think, again, as you mentioned, all the world-class swimmers, the Olympic level swimmers are breathing every 2. So again, a lot of coaches, they're trying to push the whole breathing every 5 or 6. I even hear like 7 sometimes. So it's like a breath control thing. I totally understand. But if you are trying to breathe every 7 in a 200 freestyle, you will die. So going back to what I was saying, breathing every 2, I don't think there's no issue with it. Hence the reason why world's best swimmers are breathing every 2. So even a lot of younger swimmers, I know we're trying to encourage the balanced stroke, which I totally agree with. You can still breathe every 2, but work both sides. You can just make sure you breathe into the same side, whichever way of the pool you're swimming up, right? So I don't personally think breathing is bad, as long as you're able to take breaths in a way that it doesn't affect your stroke. So of course, if you are breathing and you're taking half a second pause every time you're taking a breath, that's a little bit different. That just means you have to work on your breathing efficiency and making sure you're taking your breath at the right time with the right technique. But I think breathing is totally fine because your body requires oxygen.
I've got a hot take on this, okay? So this is what most people disagree with me on. I don't like when people breathe every 3 strokes.
I totally agree. I think it's true. I think you can... Sorry.
So like the reality is, let me get this straight. You think that your stroke is so special and so symmetric that you don't need to breathe every 2, you can breathe every 3 because your lungs are 50% more efficient than the best swimmers in the world who all breathe every 2.
Right.
You're just some unicorn. You are something special that you want to keep your stroke symmetrical. Therefore, you're willing to take 50% less oxygen by breathing every 3 instead of every 2. And you're willing to sacrifice rhythm, which contributes to stroke length. So if you look at the best swimmers in the world, we look at the people who just won the Olympics in the 1500, we have Katie Ledecky and we have Bobby Fink. How many times do they breathe? How often do they breathe?
Every 2.
Every 2. So until you can come up with something special, breathing every 2, this is my hot take, is way more efficient than breathing every 3. But so-and-so, I don't care. I don't care. If you're watching this video, you're not them. Unless you are, shout out. So make sure you're breathing every 2 to build rhythm. Yes, you need to have balance. But when it comes to racing, every 2 for anything over 100, that's the game plan.
I totally agree. I think this is, again, something I come across so much. And again, of course, there are, even we did it this morning. We did 450
set, yeah, we
as
do
a
it
set,
as a
exactly.
set, yeah,
like
yeah.
like a stroke discipline, lung capacity, warm up
Yeah.
exercise, which is totally fine. But
As a
if you're but if you're going into a 200 freestyle and you're just taking a breath whenever you want, or you're trying to breathe every 3 or 5, the word you mentioned is rhythm. I think that's so important. Again, breathing every 2 allows you to create that rhythm. Gallop freestyle, I'm sure you guys have all heard about it. If you want to gallop, if you want to find that rhythm, get into a good tempo, breathing every 2 is the way.